The cleaning cloth was still in my hand when Scott, my current husband, walked in with the look of someone who'd just decided to change someone else's entire life without asking first. He dropped a stack of papers onto the table. The sound was sharp and dry enough to make me flinch. Chloe sold your vacation house. Chloe's name, my daughter, fell into the quiet room like something dropped from a great height. I looked at the first page, a transfer contract. The signature looked pieced together from an old sample. The sale price was so low it read like the seller just wanted to get rid of it as fast as possible. Scott pulled out a chair and sat across from me. He had that kind of calm that makes you doubt yourself. The calm of someone used to steering everything. I'm guessing she needed the money, he said, voice steady like he was reading the news. A rushed sale. 3 days ago. She didn't tell anyone. Signed it right at the office. I heard every word, but it felt like none of them landed. They just slid past and left a scratch behind. Chloe never did anything impulsive. She lived folded into herself, careful, anxious enough that even switching classes could cost her a night of sleep. Yet Scott talked about her selling a major asset like he was describing something trivial, buying the wrong shoes, forgetting a wallet, breaking a hairdryer. Chloe wouldn't do that. My voice came out too small. Scott leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes full of pity, the kind that pushes you lower, not lifts you up. You have to face reality. She's always avoided responsibility. She's not like you. What he said wasn't just an accusation. It felt like a conclusion he'd written long before today. I looked at the contract again. My chest tightened. My stomach knotted. My breath stumbled. Chloe. She'd been avoiding dinner for weeks, slipping out of conversations like she was dissolving. I thought she was stressed about school. I didn't think there was something bigger underneath. I called her. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Mom? Chloe's voice, thin, shaky, like she was trying to stay afloat, even though her legs were already sinking. Chloe, did you sign anything related to the vacation house? A second of silence. 2. I heard a sharp inhale, a choke. Mom, I swear, I didn't sign anything. I never did. I don't know what's going on. Please, believe me. She broke down crying. Not the kind of crying from someone caught doing something wrong. The kind that comes from being pulled into a storm they never caused. I felt my legs go unsteady. Another layer of the situation started rising. Murky, heavy, dangerous. The moment I hung up, Scott stepped closer, his voice steady in a way that scared me. You really believe her? She signed it, Jenna. It's all right here. He pushed the stack of papers toward me. I checked all your accounts. There's no deposit, which means she only sold the house. I blinked. He checked my accounts? Since when? How? And more importantly, why did he say it like it was nothing? That question flipped a switch in my head. A series of broken images snapped together. The times he asked for my passwords to make things easier to manage. The times he told Chloe, let me talk to your mom for you. The times he answered financial emails for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Scott stood there, eyes fixed on my face. But something in his look was too calm, too certain, too much like someone who already knew exactly where the story was headed. I took a step back. Not out of fear, my body just reacted on its own to a truth I wasn't ready to touch. I needed to check Chloe's real signature. I needed to see the old documents. I needed something, anything, to hold on to now that the ground under me had been pulled away. I opened the drawer where I kept my personal records. Papers mixed together, a few old envelopes, a notebook. I sifted through everything, trying to keep my hands steady. Then my fingers touched something small, cold plastic. A black USB drive. No label, no markings. And I was sure I had never put it there. I picked it up. My heart pounded, not from panic, but because my instincts were finally speaking up. There was something in this house no one was saying out loud. Footsteps sounded from the living room. Scott was walking toward me. I slipped the USB into my pocket just as he appeared in the doorway. His eyes rested on me for only a second, but that second was enough for me to understand. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't worried. He wasn't afraid I'd question my daughter. He was afraid of one thing only, that I'd start questioning him. Scott's unnervingly calm look stayed in my mind even after he turned and left the room. It wasn't until I heard the bathroom door close that I finally let out a real breath. My chest felt tight, like something was pulling a cord around it, as I slid my hand into my pocket and touched the USB I'd just hidden. It was cold, small, but it felt like a door that could open to the truth I'd ignored for far too long. I didn't dare open it in the house. Meanwhile, Scott, with that suspicious calm of his, was walking around like someone with far too much to hide. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the front door. The moment the cool air hit my skin, I realized I'd been shaking the entire time. I drove to an empty parking lot behind a convenience store, somewhere no one paid attention, but bright enough for me to see the laptop screen. I sat in the driver's seat, shut the door, powered up the laptop, and plugged in the USB. A row of folders popped up. No names, no creation dates. Every folder I opened held something painfully familiar. Scans of my bank accounts, the vacation house documents, copies of financial records I'd never given Scott, and the one thing that froze me solid, transaction histories only I should have had access to. I swiped through each file, feeling like I was reading my own life stripped open without permission. The only person who could have taken these was the man living with me. The man who had just watched me hurt without blinking. But what really knocked the air out of me was the last folder, a series of PDF email files saved in chronological order. I opened the first one. Scott, my husband, writing to a broker, prepare the transfer contract to move the property under my company as soon as possible. I opened the second. As for the girl, I'll handle her. She just needs to sign the confirmation form. Don't let her meet the buyer directly. The girl? No one had to tell me. I knew exactly who they meant, Chloe, my daughter. I leaned back in the seat. For a moment, memories rushed in. Scott asking for my passwords to keep track of expenses, Scott telling me Chloe shouldn't be involved in finances because she gets overwhelmed, Scott offering to manage the accounts so you can focus on the family. Each piece dropped into place. Steady, cold, exact. I grabbed my phone. My fingers dialed Chloe's number so fast it felt like my body already knew the truth. Mom? Her voice came after a single ring, shaky, tired, like she'd been waiting for me to call. Where are you? I'm outside the convenience store on 8th. Good, I'm close. Meet me in the back lot. I didn't dare speak about any of this at home. Not when I still didn't know how much Scott was watching. 10 minutes later, Chloe, her face still swollen from crying, slipped into the passenger seat beside me. She'd always been fragile, but today she looked small in a way that broke me. Chloe, tell me the truth. What did Scott do to you? She clenched her hands. It took her a long moment before she spoke. He said you were tired, that you were stressed, that you couldn't handle all the paperwork. He told me I just needed to sign a few things to help you. I didn't know what they were. He said if I didn't sign, you'd have even more to deal with. My chest tightened like someone was squeezing it. Scott had used her worry for me to trap her. I was scared, Mom. I didn't know what to do anymore. Chloe turned her face away, tears sliding down her cheek, and I realized she had been carrying all of this alone, while I, who should have seen everything, had been blinded by Scott's practiced calm. I set my hand on her shoulder, but instead of feeling close, there was a strange space between us, one that only forms when two people are hurting but don't know how to reach each other. I asked, why didn't you tell me? Chloe turned back to me, her eyes red but sharper than usual, because every time I tried, you'd say, let Scott handle it. I felt like you trusted him more than me. The words landed like a small knife, clean, exact, and true. I'd let the convenience of a seemingly stable marriage blur my instincts. I'd let her believe she was standing on the outside of this family. She lowered her head. I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want to bother you. I felt angry at Chloe for staying quiet so long, and even angrier at myself for letting that silence grow. A silence Scott had probably counted on. Chloe, I kept my voice steady. You're never a bother. Scott doesn't get to make you feel that way. She bit her lip, then unlocked her phone. Mom, I have something else. Chloe handed me an audio file. When he gave me the papers, I recorded it. I played the file. Scott's voice, clear, calm, confident in a way that felt dangerous. Just sign it. Your mom will thank you. This has nothing to do with the vacation house. His words ended with that familiar sigh, the one he used whenever he wanted someone to give in. I sat completely still. A cold wave ran from my neck down my spine. Scott had lied to me. Scott had manipulated Chloe. Scott had set everything up. But the bigger question, the one that started pressing on my chest like a weight, was, why did he want the house so badly? And why was he so sure I would never find out? I sat in the car for a few more minutes after the recording ended, feeling like my body had fallen from a height I couldn't measure. The truth was starting to take shape, but it was still missing one piece big enough to make everything fully clear. When Chloe left to go back to her dorm, I looked at the USB in my hand, knowing I had to open it again. This time not to look for answers, but to confirm the ones I was afraid of. I went back home once Scott had left. I sat at the laptop in the study and opened each folder again. This time, I focused on the files I hadn't clicked before. There was one labeled confidential. I opened it. Inside were mortgage documents. Borrower, Scott Reynolds, my husband. Collateral, the vacation house under my name. My throat tightened. The numbers on the screen weren't just debt, they were a hole Scott was trying to drag me and Chloe into without either of us knowing. Next was a draft contract. Transfer full ownership of all assets to Scott Reynolds Holdings LLC. Not temporary transfer, not usage authorization, full ownership. I leaned back in the chair. My head was spinning. Scott had planned this for a long time, long enough to know I'd never question him, long enough to build a story about Chloe selling the house just to point me in the wrong direction. Part of me wanted to scream. The other part went cold. The cold that comes with waking up. That night, Scott came home, calm as always. Watching him step inside, shoes lined up, coat hung neatly, I suddenly understood why I'd trusted him so easily. He always looked like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I stood in the living room holding printouts from the USB. Scott, we need to talk. He looked at me, then at the papers. No panic at all. About Chloe? I thought we settled that. I'm not talking about Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my fingers were digging into the edges of the pages. I'm talking about your loan and the fact that you used my house as collateral. Scott's expression didn't change, not even a flicker of confusion. And somehow, that was worse than a confession. He sat down like we were discussing weekend errands. Jenna, you're misunderstanding. I only used the vacation house as temporary collateral. This is for our benefit. For your benefit, I corrected. Scott sighed. That familiar sigh that now made my stomach turn. You're doubting me because of the girl? You know she's unstable. She's easily influenced. You need to be reasonable. Each word hit like a slap, the kind of gaslighting I'd lived with so long I'd mistaken it for normal. Scott, you lied to me, and you dragged her into it. His face tightened for a split second, then softened again like he was choosing whichever reaction would serve him best. I did this for the family. You're being overly sensitive. Overly sensitive. A phrase he'd trained me with. And right then, I understood. He'd manipulated me for so long that I'd stopped trusting my own instincts. When Scott went upstairs, I stayed still, my mind running through all the signs I'd ignored. The times he called Chloe's teachers without asking to keep track of her progress. The times he told me not to put more money into the vacation house because it was unnecessary. The times he said he'd changed the bank passwords for convenience, then never told me the new ones. Each memory came back like a pair of scissors cutting through the trust I'd once had for him. I called Chloe. Her voice sounded tired, like she'd just finished crying. Mom, there's something I didn't tell you. I took a breath. Go ahead, Chloe. Scott, he said, if I didn't sign, he'd tell everyone at school my personal stuff. Her voice cracked. He said you were tired, that you couldn't handle any more problems. I believed him. A fire shot through my chest. Not the pain of betrayal. Something sharper. The anger of a mother who finally understood how scared her child had been. Chloe, I'm sorry, I said. I left you alone in this for too long. The silence between us wasn't distance anymore. It was the sound of something slowly being mended. The next day, after Scott left the house, I drove to Attorney Evans's office, the one who'd handled the vacation house purchase. He was the type who spoke little, thought fast, and never dodged a hard truth. I handed him the USB. He went through each file, his expression growing more serious by the minute. Your conclusion? I asked. Evans sat up straight. The house sale contract is fake. Chloe's signature is a scan, and your signature, taken from a document 3 years old. everything Scott did can be voided. I went still. Not because I was surprised, because it was the first time someone else confirmed what I'd known deep down. But Jenna, Evans continued, that's not the worst part. I looked at him, waiting. He opened a file I hadn't seen. If you sign one more document, something Scott will likely present in the next few days, he'll gain full control over your assets. It felt like a deep door opened inside me. Dark, empty, big enough to swallow someone's entire life. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. Is this Jenna Reynolds? Yes, I'm the broker for the recent transaction. I thought you should know, Scott is pushing to speed everything up. He said you'd be insolvent soon and needed to sell your assets before it's too late. I closed my eyes. Every vein in my body tightened. Scott had told someone else I was heading toward financial collapse, as if he were already building a cover story for taking everything. After I hung up, I sat in the car for a long time. My hands on the steering wheel, but my mind nowhere near my body. Evans had been right. Scott didn't just want the house. He wanted everything. The next morning, Scott came downstairs with a new stack of documents. You just need to sign here, he said, his voice so gentle that if I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him. I looked at the paper. My eyes ran over each word, but my heart wasn't shaking anymore. I'd already handed everything to Evans the night before. I picked up the pen. Scott smiled. A smile that finally showed the full confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. I signed. But I didn't sign his document. It was the one Evans had prepared, almost identical to the original, but legally designed to cut off every access Scott had to my assets. When I lifted the pen, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The game had turned. And for the first time in years, I was the one holding the most important card. The morning after I signed the document Evans prepared, the whole house felt quiet, in a way that didn't feel real. Scott was pouring water into the kettle like we were still a normal family. I stood by the counter, holding a glass, keeping my voice as light as I could. I finished signing, I said, pretending it hadn't kept me awake all night. Scott turned around. He studied me for a moment, like he was weighing whether I'd truly given in or was just pretending. Then he nodded, satisfaction flickering in his eyes. I knew you would, he said. I knew you'd understand. I gave him a small smile. Just enough not to raise suspicion. But inside me, every vein was holding a dangerous kind of silence. Scott trusted me, completely, and that was his biggest mistake. The moment he left the house, I called Evans, my lawyer, the one who now held the entire counterplan. Is it time? I asked. I've already filed to invalidate every transaction Scott made, Evans said. The shell company's assets are frozen, and I've requested the broker suspend all procedures involving the house. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a few seconds. Everything was moving, and for the first time, I wasn't the one backed into a corner. Around noon, I heard Scott pacing in his office. A ding from his laptop rang out, followed by the sound of a chair scraping hard against the floor. What happened? I asked, standing just outside the door. Scott looked up, confusion in his eyes. For the first time, the calm he wore like armor cracked. The broker says the deal's on hold, he said, his voice pulled tight. They said there's a legal issue. Someone intervened. I kept my face completely neutral. That's strange. Scott shot up from his chair and started pacing the room like an animal trapped in a cage. No, that's impossible. They can't freeze the entire process unless... He stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. His gaze was sharp as a blade, trying to tear through every tiny shift in my expression. I just shrugged. What are you talking about? Scott didn't answer, but I could see he was unraveling, and that unraveling wasn't anger, it was fear of being exposed. I stayed quiet, watching, letting him get caught in the web he'd spun. That afternoon, my phone vibrated. It was Chloe. Mom, Scott texted me to come to the house. He said I need to re-sign the confirmation form because the first one was invalid. I shot to my feet. Where are you now? I'm already on the way. He said it's important or you'll get in trouble. My heart slammed hard, not out of fear of Scott anymore, but because I knew he was desperate, and Chloe was the only leverage he had left. Chloe, stop. Wait for me at the corner. Mom, Chloe, do not go inside the house. I'm coming right now. I drove so fast my hands were still shaking when I pulled up to the curb. Chloe stood there hugging her backpack to her chest, her face pale like someone had dragged her into something she couldn't navigate. "Mom, I'm scared." I took her hand. "You don't have to be anymore." When I brought Chloe into the house, Scott was standing in the living room with a fresh stack of papers in his hand. The moment he saw the two of us walk in together, his face turned sharp. So sharp it showed the part of him he'd always tried to hide. "Jenna," he said, voice low. "I need to talk to Chloe for a minute. This is just to correct a mistake." I stepped forward, placing myself between him and my daughter. "No one is signing anything." Scott frowned. "You don't understand the situation. Everything's unfinished. I need her." "No," I said it slowly, each word deliberate. "There's no more forcing anyone." Chloe stayed close behind me. In that moment, simple but powerful, I felt something settle inside me. I'd finally stood up. No more stepping back. No more fear. No more being led. Scott saw it. His eyes changed. No more pretending to be calm. The doorbell rang. Scott turned, irritated. I knew exactly who was standing outside. Evans walked in with a folder under his arm. He looked straight at Scott without flinching. "We need to talk." Scott let out a short, bitter laugh. "You brought a lawyer into my house? This is a family matter." "No," I said. "This is a legal matter." Evans set the folder on the table. "I have evidence you forged Jenna's signature, used her property as collateral without authorization, and attempted to pressure her daughter into completing an illegal transaction." Scott's face shifted. He looked at me, then at Chloe, then at Evans. "I did this for the family," he said, trying to pull back the softness he once used to fool me. "I just wanted a better future for us." "Which family?" I asked. "The one you tried to split apart with fear and lies? The one where you put the weight of your mistakes on my daughter just to protect yourself?" Scott opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Every layer he'd built, his calm, his so-called concern, his carefully crafted persona, was collapsing. I stepped forward, my voice steady now. "I know about your debt. I know you used my name for the mortgage. I know you fabricated a story to turn me against my own daughter. And I know nothing you did was for this family. It was all for you." Scott stepped back, as if the hardest blow hadn't come from Evans, but from my words. "Jenna, you can't do this. I can, and I am. This marriage is over." Evans opened the final folder on the table. "Scott Reynolds, under a temporary court order and at my client's request, you are required to leave this house immediately. If you refuse, we'll request police intervention." Scott looked around, searching for an exit in a home he once believed he controlled. But this time, there was nothing left to grab onto. He turned away. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence and defeat. When the door closed behind him, Chloe ran into my arms. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly safe. I held her, my hand on her back as if grounding everything we'd almost lost. Evans gathered his files and looked at me. "We've taken back control, Jenna. But what comes next? That's your choice." I looked around the house, the place that had seen everything fall apart, and the place where I finally stood up. The story wasn't over. Chloe and I still had decisions to make about the road ahead. But for the first time in years, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. We would choose that road together. We got to the vacation house in the late afternoon. The last light of the day rested on the water, soft and gold, wide enough to make me pause for a few seconds before getting out of the car. Chloe stepped out first, shifting her backpack on her shoulder. She looked around like she was trying to reconnect with a place she used to belong to, but had been cut off from through the months of stress. The house stood there, simple, quiet, but it felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because for the first time, I walked up the steps feeling like it truly belonged to me. No Scott's shadow behind me, no fear that someone was counting every brick of this place for their own gain. Just me and my daughter. Chloe opened the door. The familiar smell of wood drifted out. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my breathing slowing. After years in the main house with Scott, I hadn't felt this light in a long time. It was like someone had finally loosened a cord that had been tightening around my chest for the entire marriage, and let it go. As we sat on the couch near the window, Chloe fiddled with the rubber band on her wrist, the habit she always had when she was anxious. "Mom." Her voice was small. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." I looked at her. She still carried the exhaustion in her face, but her eyes were different, honest, more open. No, I said. I'm the one who should apologize. I let you handle too much on your own. I didn't see what you were going through. Chloe shook her head, tears rolling down, but she didn't turn away like she usually did. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. I was scared if I said anything, you'd think I was messing up the family. I put my hand over hers. A family isn't built on fear, Chloe. And I let you think that for too long. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like space being returned to what it was meant to be, a place to heal. Chloe moved closer and rested her head on my shoulder, the way she used to when she was little. I felt her weight, not heavy from exhaustion, but heavy, because she was finally letting herself release some of the fear she'd been carrying. That was the moment I knew something between us had come back. And this time, no one was going to take it away again. That night, while Chloe went out for a walk along the path by the water, I stood at the window watching the waves roll in. The wind carried a chill, but it didn't sting. A strange feeling settled in my chest, a kind of peace that didn't come from stability, but from knowing I could stand on my own. I thought about Scott, about the words, the looks, the small actions I'd brushed aside. I thought about the way he'd built a life that looked perfect while quietly pulling pieces of my trust away day by day. But what hurt most wasn't what he did. It was how long I didn't see I was being controlled. I trusted him because I wanted a stable family for Chloe. I ignored my instincts because I was afraid of losing the feeling of being part of a pair. And this brutal, exposed betrayal was what finally shook me awake from everything I'd convinced myself to believe. I set my hand on the window frame, the ocean wind slipping through my fingers. You're awake now, I told myself, not as blame, but as recognition. When Chloe came back in, she sat beside me, pulling her jacket tight around her. Mom, she said softly, what do we do now? I looked out at the water. The waves kept crashing in, no hesitation, no permission asked. We're not going to get revenge on Scott, I said. We're not going to try to make him hurt the way I did. That's not who I am, and it's not something I want you to learn. Chloe nodded, her eyes softening. From now on, I said, we choose only what helps us grow. We don't choose fear, we don't choose shrinking ourselves to please someone, and we don't choose people who make us smaller. And I meant it. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I was heading, toward freedom. Toward growth, for me and for Chloe. When it finally got dark, we stepped out onto the porch. The sky opened wide, the ocean turning black but not threatening. I stood by the railing and took a long breath. The pull in my chest was gone. What replaced it was a strange, steady clarity. A person's worth isn't measured by the assets they keep or lose. It's measured by whether they have the courage to walk away from relationships that make them doubt themselves, that make them disappear, that make them forget how strong they once were. I looked down at my hands that used to shake because of Scott. Now they didn't. From here, I thought, we start over. Chloe leaned on the railing beside me, looking at me and then out at the water. Mom, we really are starting over, right? I turned to her. I smiled, a small smile, but deep enough that I felt settle straight into my chest. Starting today. The ocean wind moved around us. Not cold, not threatening, just free. And our story closed in that quiet we didn't inherit, quiet we fought for, quiet we reclaimed with our own courage.